So, guys, I want to talk about a video that neurodivergent Nate was like talking about, and he was saying that there is a trend. And I've noticed as well that there is a trend of people sabotaging their kids' birthday party. So, like, what they'll do is they take their kid's head and they'll dunk their head into a cake, and they'll be laughing at all the whipped cream and all like the icing all over their face. And sometimes kids get angry and they start trashing their own birthday party or flipping over a table, or there is like this, and I don't believe this to be true, but there is this video of a college girl, and what happened was that somebody dunks her face into the cake, and there's toothpicks inside of it, and she got disfigured because they pushed her head hard enough that it skewered her, and all that stuff, and she lost her nose. But I don't believe that because that looks like that's a fake video. But there's also times where people like may do it while there's still candles, so people can be set on fire, really, or girls have their hair and they can have like, you know, hairspray and they can go on fire, really. But also, we have to talk about this. That first of all, number one, it is emotionally abusive because technically you're humiliating somebody. And then also, like with kids, I mean, they may say like, "Oh, it's just part of a joke or a gag." I know many people who don't celebrate their birthdays or they don't look forward to their birthdays because they're always like, somebody's gonna fuck it up, really. Or when I was a kid, I stopped celebrating my birthday with my family. I'll do a video with that because I remember like the last birthday I ever celebrated, my older brother, younger brother were goofing off, and my parents had to raise their voices at them. Mind you, one of them was in their mid 20s, and the other one was like 12 or 13 years old, really. But the point of it is that that really it creates a bad memory, and then it's also humiliating somebody. And then it's also kind of like what we said, that sometimes the way parents should teach their kids is that how would your boss react, or how would your human resources react if you behaved how you treated your kid, really. So imagine if you're at work and somebody somebody says, okay, since you dunked your kid's head in icing, we're gonna have you do that to the boss. You'll probably you can get assault charges. Or what if you did that to a CEO and you got fired, or assault charges? You wouldn't like that. Or how would you react if, let's say, you had a friend's wedding, and your kid says like, hey, I'm going to dunk your friend's the bride's face into the cake, really, because you did that on my birthday, because fair even's even, or to prove a point, really, or just to be like, hey, you know what, it's a learned behavior, really. But it's also part of this culture of why a lot of kids are bad nowadays, is because they come from bad parents. And the issue with a lot of the baby boomer parents, the Generation X, the millennial parents, is that they fuck around too much. There's the baby boomers who may be like, oh well, I'm going to do that to toughen you up and just to have a nice laugh, really. And then there's Generation X and the millennials who want to be the cool parents and be like, okay, you know what, we fuck around a little bit, and that's that, really. But the thing about it is that like I'll say before and I'll say it again, really, that it's bad etiquette, because again, you guys wouldn't like it if I did that to it's just like bad etiquette, because treat others the way you want to be treated. And I think that sometimes what happens with parents is that they kind of like to mess with their kids, really. And I think that messing and pranking children is not really appropriate. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I had like this big like eclair ice cream. I had like this like eclair ice cream. I remember my dad chasing me around the house because he wanted to bite into it, and he was laughing in my face because he's like, "Ha ha ha! I get to eat your ice cream." And I was crying and tears were going down my face. I was like, "Oh, I'm getting my germs and bacteria." I actually wanted to punch my dad in the fucking face for doing that. Or I remember like one time I almost punched my dad in the fucking face because I was like in 6th grade, and my dad took my brother's binky and he put it in my mouth, really. He said, "Oh, well, I got," and he actually was grabbing my head, and he was open, and he was like, and other things like that. Or I remember one time my dad was slapping me on the butt and chuckling, So it's like, as I said, really, like I remember that time I was talking to a psychiatrist, and I was telling them how, one time my dad almost beat me with a vacuum cleaner and he flipped over a table. So if I add those things, I'll say, okay, clearly, we got to remove you and also your baby brother, because clearly, the man's got issues. But the point of it is, some parents have that mentality of disrespect, really, or my child's an extension of my body. I can touch their head. I can do whatever I want with them. I can poke them. I can just ruin their birthday parties, and then and like put their head in cake really. And then the other thing too is that it's not about you, fuck you, because that's what happens to a lot of parents. They always There is a trend in this country really of parents just trying to take over things. Like I was watching this birthday video of like a 1 year old celebrating their birthday, eating their cake. There's a candle in the cake. They're 1 year old, and their mother's just twerking her ass really, in the background. Well, maybe the baby's not gonna pay attention and burn their hand. Maybe they're gonna bend over to get like a better taste of the cake. They're wearing like a birthday cap. That cap can go on fire really. So yeah, that's kind of like a big issue really. I just really think it's very very unfortunate that that goes on really, and we all understand. Part of it's assault. The other thing is like that double standard of when you're a kid you can be disrespected or fucked with, and you have to tolerate that. And then the other part of it is that it teaches humiliation, double standards, lack of boundaries. Because and then also, as I said too, that it can teach people to be antisocial growing up, because it can teach a kid, hey, you know what? I don't want to celebrate my birthday. My parents calling me for a birthday party. I'm like, fuck that. Or maybe somebody like has like maybe like the parents have you decide to have kids. You have a granddaughter, and you're like, okay, you know what? My parents are now grandparents, and they want to have this good moment because they're about to die. They want to see their granddaughter grow up, have nice, birthday pictures, and then then the parents like, okay, because it happened to me, I'm gonna squash their face into it. So now now their parents are upset that their granddaughter is going through the same thing, and he's like, okay, well, you did it to me, and all that really. Then there's people, like I said, people not celebrating their birthdays, and they can also teach people to be sociopaths, because it can be like, okay, well, because that's how I was raised. I was really raised with that there are double standards. The respect that I show matters, but the disrespect people show me doesn't matter. And doing this is a clear example of disrespect of the parent not mattering, but the respect of the child mattering. So it's always really, really important to really be like, hey, you know what? We got kids. We need to treat our kids with, respect, manners, and boundaries, because we don't do that, then what are we teaching really? Sometimes, yes, we can fuck around with our kids, but sometimes, there's some fucking around that you don't do. And then I also will always say this, I think sometimes you need to have conversations with your children, like saying, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we did this and that? And they're like, nah, I don't like that. Or get to know your kid. There's some kids who like to be clean and proper. There's some kids who just like to have their moment, and they don't like their moment to be fucked with. I've always kind of said this, and it came true in a certain way that part of me never wanted to have a wedding with my family, because I know like how my older brother is crude. Or I always would say something like, my brother's the type of person that if I was taking a wedding photo, he'll be in the background peeing in the woods. Or how my dad's kind of really controlling, so he'll be like, okay, it has to be done this way, that way. Or my younger brother would be like, woo! Give me some of that if he saw me and my wife kiss each other during a wedding, really, So that's one of the reasons why if I had a wedding, I wouldn't be doing that, So with family, because sometimes what happens is that when kids grow up and they go through this stuff, they'll be like, hey, I don't want to have a wedding with my family because all the disrespect I get really, and that translates, so that's also important really. But I also like what I've said before really, like imagine if parents had an anniversary, not like an anniversary party, and they had kids that treat them the exact same way really, like I imagine belts being taken out and beaten, and kids being beaten really, because we all live in a double standard. But like I said, really, always treat your kids with respect, really. And sometimes messing around with them can be a little too far, really. It's not about teaching kids to be tough, really, but it's teaching kids, that ultimate saying of how respect is one way, really. And we have to be a little careful with parents, because sometimes when you teach that, it can teach a kid to grow up to be resentful and antisocial, because you're teaching that only matters when the kid is showing respect, but not the parent showing respect.